I mean, I don't live in Hollywood now. I just,
Where do you live?
I live, in Arizona and, all over the place. So, I mean, I still have a relationship with Hollywood. I just don't live there.
What happens when the strongest man in the room can no longer stand tall? At 73, Steven Seagal's story is not about power, but about loss, pain, and the heavy price of fame. He was once the unstoppable action hero who made villains tremble. But today, his life tells a darker truth. Stay with me, because what you're about to hear will change how you remember him forever. From fragile child to relentless fighter. There are no cheers or camera flashes at the start of Steven Seagal's story. In Lansing, Michigan, a boy is gasping for air at the beginning. Steven was born in 1952, and he was so weak that his friends talked about whether he would even make it to adulthood. He couldn't enjoy the easy things other kids took for granted because of his asthma, which was like invisible chains around him. Steven stayed pressed up against a window and watched life go on without him, while other boys his age chased footballs outside. The nights were worse. His mother paced the floor, scared as she listened to his short breaths. She thought that any of them could be his last. His never-ending fight against weakness gave him a trait that no school lesson could ever teach: resistance. Every trip to the doctor, every mean comment at school, and every long night of gasping for air put a seed in him. He would not only live if he had the chance, he would fight. Moving to California from the East Coast in 1957 was the first risk his parents took in that fight. They gave up security, friends, and everything they knew in the hopes that the sun and warm air would help their son feel better. It worked for Steven. His chest opened up, and his lungs let out air for the first time. He knew what it was like to be able to move freely. It wasn't just relief at that moment. It was a new start. Steven wasn't calm, though, even though his lungs were better. He had been weak for so long that getting stronger became his only goal. He was curious about what it was like to be able to stand firm and not worry about falling apart from the inside. Because of this passion, he looked east, past the beaches of California and all the way to Japan, where discipline was not just a hobby, but a way of life. By the time he was 22, Seagal had crossed the ocean to follow a dream that not many Americans were brave enough to try. In Osaka, he didn't find a warm welcome. In the 1970s, traditional dojos were closed-off places that were watched like fortresses. People from other countries were not taken seriously, and Steven was looked at suspiciously from the time he stepped on the mats. He was pushed to the limit with every throw he tried, every move he made, and every bit of his energy. He wasn't just a stranger, he was an intruder in a place where custom and lineage were the most important things. The training was very hard. At the end of each day, his body was hurt, his joints were screaming, and his heart was almost broken. Even more alone he felt at night, when strange streets whispered doubts in his ear. But he learned to talk through persistence. He came back every day. His actions got sharper over time. His throws were heavy and smooth. People who used to laugh at him started to respect the American who wouldn't give up. His link to Miyako Fujitani, who is the daughter of an Aikido master, made him feel even more grounded. She made Steven feel like he was part of a family with roots in Japanese martial arts. He was no longer just another stranger. By the late 1970s, he had done something almost unimaginable. He was in charge of a school in Japan. He was one of the first Americans to be given that kind of power. A boy who used to have trouble breathing now stood as a teacher among masters. It was more than a success for him. It was fate coming true. That hunger was about to meet Hollywood. the place where legends are made, broken, and sometimes lost. The making of an unstoppable legend. Stephen brought the discipline he learned in Japan with him when he came back to the United States in the early 1980s. However, Los Angeles was not the same as Japan. He started a dojo in West Hollywood with his partner Haruo Matsuoka. It was a lot like Osaka, but it was driven by desperation. There were often no mats on the floor and rent letters piled up. Stephen would sweep the floors late at night with nothing but silence to listen to. To stay alive, they had to teach non-stop during the day and fight off the weight of unpaid bills at night. He hid in Hollywood's back doors and worked as a martial arts organizer to keep the lights on. In 1982, he worked on The Challenge, and in 1983, he was in Sean Connery's last Bond movie, Never Say Never Again. They were small credits, moments of notice that made things seem possible, but they weren't enough. Stephen didn't just want to fix up fight scenes for other people. His goal was for the camera to catch him. That chance came to him in 1988, when he was 36 years old, and most artists had already made a name for themselves. It was against all odds that Above the Law brought him to the public's attention. Even though no one knew his face, you could feel his cool, cold, and strangely magnetic presence. Not only did the movie do well, but it also created a new type of action star. Some Aikido styles used flashy kicks or over-the-top stunts, but Seagal's was quick, effective, and cruel. After a wrist lock and a throw that broke bones, the fight was over. It looked and felt real, and people had never seen anything like it before. Above the Law's popularity set off a storm. His movies, Hard to Kill, Marked for Death, and Out for Justice, came out one after the other between 1988 and 1992. With each new movie, he rose to fame, and with each part, his reputation as Hollywood's most dangerous man became even stronger. He didn't need a lot of one-liners or fancy starts. His lack of movement was his weapon, and his sudden, violent outbursts were the exclamation point. People leaned in because they believed him. Then came 1992, the year he was crowned. Under Siege wasn't just a movie, it caused a huge stir. Seagal was great as Casey Ryback, the Navy SEAL who became a cook and took out terrorists on a battleship. He had the right mix of charm and controlled anger. The movie made more than $150 million around the world, making him one of the biggest stars of the decade. For a boy who used to get out of breath easily, this was the top. He was now on the same level as big names like Stallone, Schwarzenegger, and Van Damme. It looked like nothing could hurt him for a moment. He was stronger than he ever thought he would be as a child, and no one could hurt him. For many, he was the perfect example of an unbreakable fighter. The kind of hero Hollywood didn't know it needed until he showed up. Because the more you climb, the harder you fall, and Steven Seagal was about to take a terrible fall. The fall of Hollywood's cold warrior. It looked like no one could hurt Steven Seagal when he was at the height of his fame, but Hollywood has a way of sending kings into exile. By the middle of the 1990s, the whole field that made him famous was starting to fade away. In the 1980s, heroes who were big and strong were losing ground to stories that were slicker, faster, and more up-to-date. People wanted new performers, and the old guard felt out of date all of a sudden. On Deadly Ground, which came out in 1994, was Seagal's first big mistake. He directed the movie and added a personal message about taking care of the land, because this was his chance to show that he was more than just a fighter. But instead of respect, the movie made them feel bad about themselves. It didn't do well at the box office, and critics made fun of the preachy speeches. What he meant to be his bravest statement turned out to be his greatest failure. The blow was very hard, He kept going with Under Siege 2 and an extra part in Executive Decision, but things were already losing steam. By the late 1990s, it was clear that the fall had begun. His movies were no longer shown in cinemas. They were put out right away on video, which was a huge step down for a man who used to have hundreds of millions of fans around the world. Seeing his name on cheap DVDs was not only bad for his business, but it was also embarrassing for everyone to see. There were more arguments as the job got smaller. From what people said about him on set, he seemed cocky and hard to work with. Even worse were the claims made by women over many years of abuse and inappropriate behavior. Every claim hurt the legend he had built, leaving a stain on his reputation that could not be cleaned up by a comeback. What used to be respect turned into suspicion, and the fighter who had asked for quiet on screen was now surrounded by noise he couldn't stop. Then politics started. In 2016, Seagal became a Russian citizen and stood next to Vladimir Putin as if their friendship were a badge of honor. For many Americans, this felt like betrayal, and they lost any respect they still had. Seagal's support for a controversial leader made people feel even more like he was moving farther away from the man they used to admire. Even the things he tried that weren't related to movies failed. Deadly Honor was an idea for a video game that never made it to stores. People made fun of his branded energy drink until it became unknown. Fragrances and martial arts souvenirs were also tried, but no one bought them. Every product he made turned into a joke, showing that his kingdom wasn't just getting smaller, it was falling apart. His last blow came when his huge Tennessee home, which was once worth almost $4 million, was sold for only $500,000. The fall from glory was terrible for a man who used to seem like he was bigger than life. Broken bonds. Steven Seagal fought many hard wars on screen, but his worst ones were at home, away from the cameras. Aikido master Miyako Fujitani was his wife. They lived together in Japan for a long time before Hollywood knew his name. They had 2 kids together, and for a short time, the flow of family life made him feel at ease. But his drive took him across the ocean. He left behind the people who had made him feel like he belonged when he went after Hollywood. He later stated that he lost the people who were most important to him because he wanted everything. That cut never got better. The second marriage he had, to actress Adrienne LaRussa, didn't last long and was very unstable. They met quickly, like he was looking for safety instead of commitment, and they broke up just as quickly. There were no children or memories that would last. There was only the empty lesson that love built on emptiness can't last. Then he married Kelly LeBrock, a beautiful actress and model whose face was already famous all over the world. It seemed like fate had brought them together. From the outside, they looked like movie stars. After that, they had 3 kids, and their house was full of laughter. For a while, it looked like Seagal had finally found a good mix between fame and family. But time apart broke down what love had made strong. The constant stress of being a star, the long months spent on set, and the rumors of cheating broke down their marriage. By the middle of the 1990s, the dream had been broken by a public split. When there were custody fights, private pain made the news, and what was once a sweet love story turned into a warning. Later, Seagal told the truth in a very honest moment that he had lost things that he could never get back. Erdanatuya Ele Batsuk, a Mongolian dancer who had first worked with him as a translator, became a different kind of partner as time went on. Unlike his other relationships, this one took place away from the spotlight of Hollywood. For Seagal, having a son with her was like getting a second chance. He was holding a baby, thinking that maybe, just maybe, he could rebuild what he had lost at an age when many people are already grandfathers. But the darkness stays. He had 7 kids over the course of several decades. Each child bears his name and the marks of his absence. Birthdays that were missed, school shows with empty seats, and long periods of time when he wasn't there, but silence filled the air. But the times with his family that were most important to him were taken away by his fame. And just like family ties broke, the man's body, which had seemed unbreakable at first, did too. Because everyone, even fighters, has to face the weakness of their own strength at some point. The warrior's body betrays him. Steven Seagal's body was his best tool for many years. Every hand lock, hard throw, and cold look held the weight of a man who looked like he couldn't be hurt. However, the body that made him famous came with a secret cost, and over time, that cost was paid. Karate and acting work for years have left their mark. His shoulders took the impact of thousands of throws, and his hips and knees got worn out from doing the same thing over and over. He had sprains that were taped up, and fractures that were ignored so that he could finish a scene. In one famous practice, he was choked to death and fell to the floor. He pushed through it all for a long time because he was too proud to say what each bruise and harm was slowly taking away. By the time he was 50, the changes were clear. It lost its sharp, fluid moves that used to scare opponents on screen. Instead, it became stiff and heavy. The Aikido circles got smaller, and his sudden bursts of speed were more carefully timed. Directors started to change the camera settings, cutting faster and cropping closer to hide what his body could no longer do. In the 2000s and 2010s, even small moves turned into fights. The stairs got steeper, chairs got harder to get into, and mornings got slower to get up from. Tabloids made fun of his weight by comparing him to the unbeatable warrior of the 1990s and the slower, bigger man of today. But behind the headlines was a truth that hurt more than being made fun of. The body that had made him famous on screen had turned into his worst enemy. Seagal once said, "Every step I take now, I remember the fights that got me here." The words show something much deeper than what they seem. The pains he felt were more than just signs of getting older. They reminded him of the battles he had fought against being weak, being turned down, and even time itself. The sadness is not just that he slowed down, it's that what made him strong turned out to be what hurt him. So the fighter who used to be the picture of bravery had to learn a new kind of bravery. He wasn't the fastest or strongest anymore, but he found a quieter kind of courage in just going on. To keep working, even though everyone else was laughing. To keep working out, even though his body was hurting. To keep going, even though the years were pushing harder than any enemy ever had. Seagal, who is now in his 70s, lives alone on his farm in Arizona. With its bulletproof glass and tall warrior statues, the property doesn't feel like a house as much as it does like a fortress built to withstand the storms of time. His once huge wealth has dropped to about $14 million, which is still a good amount, but not as much as some of his friends who are still doing very well. His shed has a classic Mustang, a Chevrolet Caprice, a Jaguar XJ220, and a Mercedes GL. Instead of toys, it looks more like a museum of memories, with each car representing the speed and power he used to have. Seagal turned to music when Hollywood turned its back on him. Critics made fun of his records, songs from The Crystal Cave and Mojo Priest, but he saw them as ways to stay alive. He once said that he felt living as long as he had a guitar in his hand. There may not have been as many people on stage or in the crowd, but the music kept his heart beating when the screen stopped. At 73, Steven Seagal's story is both legend and tragedy. If you felt his journey, like, share, and subscribe. And don't miss the next video now popping up on your screen.